Welcome back, everyone. We are starting this section on something called cell growth and cell division. So when we talk about cell growth and cell division, what we are really referring to is we are talking about what life cycle the cells go through. So most of this unit, we're going to spend talking about the actual division phase of it, called mitosis or meiosis. But depending upon where you catch it, most of the cell's life is actually spent in something called interphase, which is what this section is about. So when we talk about why cells divide, the reason why a cell will divide, and these are things you should know, is for growth, repair, replacing old cells, and something called reproduction. So there's two different types of reproduction. There's sexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. So asexual reproduction, one organism makes another organism genetically the same, or sexual reproduction, two organisms combine their genetic information to make one. And we have to talk about sex cells, so sperm and egg cells. So why do cells divide? Growth, repair, replace, or reproduction. That's why a cell will divide. So why do cells need the cell cycle? Remember, the cell theory says that the cells are the basic unit of life, and all cells come from pre-existing cells. Well, if they had to come from pre-existing cells, that means those cells had to have divided in order to get there. And also, all living things are made of cells. So the cell cycle is a series of steps that the cells go through along the way to help them provide and make these new cells that all living things must have. So the cell cycle starts in one body cell. So we have two basic types of cells. We have body cells, also called somatic cells, that are in all parts of your body: your fingers, your toes, your hair, your muscles, your skin, your bones. And then we have something called sex cells. So that's in the sperm and the egg cells that are produced for sexual reproduction. So that's really the only types of cells. We have body cells, which is every single part of your body except for your sex cells, egg and sperm. And then we have sex cells. So this is how they go through and create two new identical body cells, okay? Identical, genetically the same. So the cell cycle that we start with is we're going to take what we call a parent cell, and we're going to divide them into two daughter cells. So one parent divides into two daughter cells through the process of cell division. So the major steps of the cell cycle, and this is what that activity that you were to have done after the test and prior to getting here today over break, is to kind of work through these. So there's two major steps that we can say that the cell is either going to be in interphase or in mitosis. Now, most of this unit, we're going to be talking about this section, mitosis, but realize that the vast majority of the cell's life is spent in interphase. So interphase is the part of the cell's life where they are preparing for division and their everyday, day-to-day cell things are going on. If they're a muscle cell, they're contracting. If it's a heart cell, your heart's beating. If it's a bone cell, it's providing support for your body. And then when we go through mitosis, it's where the cells are actually dividing. So there's some important terms that we're going to be using throughout this unit that you need to know, and a lot of it deals with DNA. So we haven't gotten to the unit on DNA. That will be our next unit. No, sorry, 2 units from now. But we need to know some basic things about DNA. So DNA is genetic information that tells your body what to do. So we know it's in the nucleus, and then we have already talked about that the DNA in your cell is, is most of the time it's in something called chromatin form. So when we talk about chromatin, it's uncoiled DNA found in the nucleus. So I often talk about it, it looks like a bowl of spaghetti. Okay, it's uncoiled, and if you were to stretch it all out, it'd be really, really, really big. I think each cell has like 6 feet worth of DNA if you were to stretch it all out, which is impressive considering how small a cell is. So it's the uncoiled DNA, spaghetti-like in your cells, is called chromatin. But what happens during cell division is this chromatin condenses to form something called a chromosome or a chromatid. So when we talk about chromosome, this is our typical like chromosome that we think about as an X shape. And when we talk about chromosomes, they've already replicated. So they've copied the DNA. So when we talk about what is a chromosome, part A, this overall structure is a chromosome. It's already been replicated. Half of the chromosome is called a sister chromatid. So when we talk about a sister chromatid, it's either that part, the yellow part, part C, or it's this part, which is part D. It's one of the two. Now, the thing about these sister chromatids is because they've already replicated, the two halves are genetically identical. Again, they are genetically identical, the sister chromatids. At the center point, we have something called a centromere, and that's just a little protein that binds those two things, the sister chromatids, together. And then we have these bands that occur on these sister chromatids, and these bands are like sections of DNA, or we can think of a gene as a location on the DNA, and it codes for a particular trait. So it could be for hair color or eye color. Notice how I said hair color or eye color, not blue eyes or blonde hair. It codes for hair color or eye color. It codes for a trait, and we'll talk about more of that more later. So during interphase is the part of the cell's division that happens before the cell goes to mitosis. So it goes from here and it goes all the way over to here. That's interphase. G1, S, and G2 all collectively combined make interphase. Okay, so during interphase, individual chromosomes are not visible. We have chromatin uncoiled DNA, chromatin uncoiled DNA, which is found in the nucleus. The DNA and organelles are copied because we're going to divide the cells, so each set of cells needs an exact copy of organelles, right? They need mitochondria, they need chloroplast if they're a plant cell, they need endoplasmic reticulum, and they need a copy of that genetic information or that DNA. Of a cell, a typical cell will spend about 96% of its life in interphase. And they're just doing their day-to-day stuff. Again, muscle cells are being muscle cells, heart cells are being heart cells, brain cells are being brain cells. That's interphase. So during interphase, we have G1, we have S, we have G2. A couple things happen. So in G1, the purpose of G1 is for the cell to grow. During G1, the cell grows. That's the big thing. G stands for growth. So G1, the cell grows. And there's these checkpoints along the way. So before it leaves G1 and goes into S, there's a checkpoint. It's really just like, did things go well? And should we proceed? Okay, so there's these checks along the way. But G1, the cell grows. The cell grows in G1. During S phase, so G1 to S phase, during S phase, they've gone past the checkpoint. And what now they're going to do is they can't go back to G1. They've gone past that restriction point. During S phase, DNA is synthesized. DNA is synthesized during S phase. Or what does synthesized mean? It means to put together. So DNA is replicated. Okay, so in S phase, DNA is replicated. So now the cell has twice as much DNA because when it splits, it will have the original amount that it needs. During G2, which is the third phase of the cell cycle. So we go G1, growth, S, DNA replicates. Now we're in G2, which is the last phase prior to mitosis. We get more growth. Again, G stands for growth, so we get more growth, and we duplicate organelles. Or sometimes we could say it prepares for mitosis. Okay, so G2, growth and replication of organelles. Growth, DNA copies, prepares for mitosis by growing and replicating organelles. That's what's going on. Then we get into mitosis. Now during M phase or mitosis, this is where the cell is no longer growing because it's going to divide. So the cell really focuses on creating these two identical daughter cells. During mitosis, one cell becomes two genetically identical daughter cells. Mitosis is very short. Only about 4% of its life is in mitosis. Most of its life is spent in interphase, which is again G1, S, G2, 96%. Only about 4% of its cell's life is found in M phase or mitosis. And again, there's checkpoints along the way to make sure things are going right. But during M phase, one cell divides into two genetically identical daughter cells. At the very, very end of mitosis is the division of the nucleus and the genetic information. There's another phase, there's another step, I guess we should call it, and it's called cytokinesis. So cytokinesis is when the cytoplasm pinches off or divides into two new cells because the genetic information has already kind of happened. So at the end of mitosis is something called telophase or telophase, and then we get cytokinesis and we get this pinching of the cytoplasm. So during cytokinesis, the cytoplasm splits into two genetically identical daughter cells. Sometimes a cell will go into G0. Not all, but some. So G0 is like a resting phase. Sometimes they go into G0. Okay? Sometimes they don't. Some cells just keep going around and around and around and around, and they just keep going through and replicating, and just keep making more for repair, regrowth, replace, and reproduction. But sometimes a cell will exit and it'll go into G0. Sometimes they go to G0 and they stop, and they'll never come out of G0. Sometimes cells will go to G0 and they're going to rest, and they rest, and they rest, and they rest. Oh, got to go back into G1, and then we got to divide again. It depends upon the type of cell. During G0, the cells are still alive, but they are not dividing. They are not dividing. Example would be a nerve cell. Your brain cells are alive, but they don't divide. If you damage brain cells, they're damaged forever. If you kill brain cells or spinal tissue, it's gone and it's destroyed and it's broken forever, and it doesn't repair itself. So some cells can re-enter G0, but some can't. So if a cell does not pass a checkpoint, it goes directly into G0, so it can be destroyed and it won't divide. So sometimes if something goes wrong, it can go into G0, and then it can destroy that cell, and we don't want to replicate poorly, deformed cells. So our body kind of recognizes them that, something's wrong, not going to replicate that. So sometimes they go into G0 to be destroyed, but sometimes they just go to rest. So sometimes there's different cells go through cell division differently. So for example, bone cells are constantly dividing to replace worn out red blood cells. I think they say every 8 years, your skeletal system has been completely replaced by new cells because they're constantly replacing older ones. Skin cells are constantly dividing, and you have dead skin cells on top. When you cut yourself, those skin cells are replaced. All liver cells are in G0 because they don't need to be replaced. And then nerve cells rarely will divide. So again, what I mentioned, damage to the brain or spinal cord cannot normally be repaired. And we say can't normally. There are some exceptions. Some stuff with stem cells is being worked on. But most of the time, if you're paralyzed, you're always going to be paralyzed. If you have brain damage, you're always going to have brain damage. Okay, so it depends on what type of cell you're talking about. Very generically, we talk about uncontrolled cell growth or uncontrolled cell division as something called cancer. So sometimes the cell loses control of the cell cycle completely, and it forms these masses of cells called tumors. Now, there's two different types of tumors that you probably are familiar with, or you've heard the terms at least. There's something called a benign tumor or a malignant tumor. So if it's a benign tumor, it's a non-cancerous tumor. Okay, so they'll do a biopsy to test what kind of cells they are, and if it's a benign tumor, that means it's non-cancerous. However, if a tumor is malignant, that means it's a form of cancer or cancerous cells. And what cancer is, it's uncontrolled cell division. So what happens is we get a mutation, and then this mutation keeps getting passed on, and then what we get is this rapid cell growth, and we get this lump, or we get a tumor. There's lots of different things that can cause this cancer. Sometimes we have no idea, but sometimes it's things that we put into our body or we introduce to our bodies called carcinogens. Some examples of that would be smoking, vaping, being out in the sun too long without sunscreen, getting x-rays done at the dentist, at the doctor. Yes, the doctor gives you x-rays which can cause cancer, but the idea is it's cost benefit. In order for us to get an x-ray, it's going to benefit us to see if your bone is broken and if we need to fix that. So it's a small dosage and we don't do it every day. But these types of carcinogens can lead to cancer. If you have any questions, let us know.